Good evening. Good evening and welcome. What a lively crowd. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. My name is Arlene Montevecchio, and I'm the director of the Center for Spirituality here at St. Mary's College. The Center for Spirituality was founded in 1984 with generous support from the Sisters of the Holy Cross. The sisters who have responded to the needs of the times for over 175 years, many of whom are here tonight, and so we acknowledge them in gratitude. At this time, I ask you to silence your cell phones and encourage you to please stay through the duration of our program. Please join me in welcoming President Janice A. Cervelli to the podium to give some remarks on the behalf of the college.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for one of the great St. Mary's moments of the year. I've been looking forward to the Madeleva Lecture for a long time, both for the opportunity to hear from our distinguished speaker on a subject that is central to all that we do at St. Mary's, and since I'm still technically a freshman, to experience this wonderful college tradition for the first time, and yes, I still get lost on campus. You know, the essence of a St. Mary's education is a recognition of our quest for wholeness and direction for each of the young women we educate here, and helping them to learn for themselves how to discover and how to achieve that education for themselves. We guide and we challenge our students to discover the connections of mind, heart, and soul. Those indivisible parts of ourselves should grow together. What makes our mission so distinct, and what an enlightening evening like tonight highlights, is a sense of discovery of what it means to satisfy our hunger for wholeness. That's the ultimate meaning of a St. Mary's education. At the heart of making that ideal a reality is the Campus Center for Spirituality. So I'm going to ask Arlene if you could do us the honor of introducing our honored guest. Thank you.
Thank you, President Cervelli. Many of you may know that the Madeleva Lecture is named after Sister Madeleva Wolff, a former president of St. Mary's College who pioneered graduate theological training for lay women and men from 1943 to 1970. The lecture honors a distinguished female theologian annually to give due attention to women's voices in theology. And it is my distinct honor to introduce our 32nd Madeleva Lecturer, Sister Ilia Delio. Ilia Delio is a Franciscan sister of Washington, D.C., and holds the Josephine C. Connelly Endowed Chair in Theology at Villanova University. A native of Newark, New Jersey, she earned doctorates in pharmacology from Rutgers University and in historical theology from Fordham University. She is the recipient of a Templeton Course in Science and Religion Award and the author of 17 books. Her recent Making All Things New, Catholicity, Cosmology, and Consciousness has been nominated for the prestigious 2018 Grawemeyer Award from the Louisville Institute. Dr. Delio's research interests include divine action and evolution, science and metaphysics, Christogenesis and cosmotheandrism, and artificial intelligence and transhumanism. The 32nd annual Madeleva Lecture titled A Hunger for Wholeness, Soul, Space, and Transcendence is contracted for publication by Paulist Press. Please join me in welcoming Sister Ilia Delio.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. when I hear it, my interests are, it sounds like something from another age, cosmotheentrism. And so a lot of my work does cut across different disciplines of theology, spirituality, culture, and science. And my talk this evening really will encompass these areas as I continue to strive to find a new narrative, a new vision for our emerging human lives and an emerging church. And I might begin with something that Sigmund Freud in 1915 to 1917 gave a series of lectures at the University of Vienna. And interestingly, he was trying to set the stage for his own new discoveries on the mind and the human person. And what Freud basically said is, given enough time, we humans will overcome anything that we think we're distinguished from, whether it's the cosmos or nature or mind itself. And so Freud sort of set the stage for what Bruce Maslich calls the Four Discontinuities. And I want to take that paradigm for my talk this evening to ask this question. Can we move toward a new type of discontinuity where we are no longer separated from, but come to a new level of interaction and interrelation? And here's the question I want to ask. Can we transcend our world of individual persons, autonomous persons who often are in conflict and competition? And can we arrive at a new level of humankind, one that is co-reflective and co-evolving? That is no small order. Now, to begin my way into this question, I like to begin with, in a sense, what we have known, because that's where we are most comfortable. And I think if I begin with the medieval cosmos, it's not only that we are most comfortable still religiously in that cosmos, it is also to raise the question about cosmology. Now, that's not something that we talk about or think about often, but, tell me your cosmology, and I will tell you your anthropology. Right? Tell me how you conceive of the cosmos and its order, and I'll know something about who you are in that order. In the Middle Ages, truthfully, it was kind of nice because it was static, fixed, and geocentric. The world wasn't really going anywhere except for it, had a function. And basically, part of that, fixed universe was both the material reality of belonging to the earth and the spiritual reality of being surrounded by the heavens. And so for the medieval person, there was, in a sense, a space for the body and a space for the soul. And so there was a place for the soul to stretch, so to speak, a place for the soul to imagine, to aspire. And that was, in a sense, that longing beyond what could be seen in those heavens towards what could not be seen. That space was rattled in the 15th century as astronomers began to measure or observe the movements of the planets. And of course, I think we know the story fairly well, that it was a good Polish Catholic astronomer by the name of Nicholas Copernicus, who began to realize that perhaps this is not a static, Earth-centered cosmos, but it seemed that we could be moving with other planets around the sun. Well, Nick had a hard time with his own discovery, and wasn't so sure what to do with it. But, others came along, and of course the famous one being Galileo, who could affirm that discovery and say, yes, we are moving with other planets around the sun, and this is a heliocentric cosmos. That kind of discovery of space, a new discovery of space, also began the rise of modern science, and more as science began to emerge as a discipline, it could begin to address questions that were otherwise, in previous eras, relegated to religion. And so God was, in a sense, pushed out more and more as the unnecessary hypothesis. And of course, Descartes grappled with this shift and the discoveries of space. Descartes, being Jesuit, not that that was a problem for him, but Jesuit trained, and severely Catholic, being a French Catholic, really struggled with how can we know, what kind of knowledge can we have? If God is now, if God is now being pushed out, if the earth is shifting. And so Descartes ingeniously, really, came up with a solution by separating the mind from matter in his self-thinking subject. So the soul became for Descartes the thinking self, the thinking conscious self, whereas the body became sort of an extension of the material world. And while I think Descartes really sought to safeguard the human person in a changing world, what he did inadvertently was, in a sense, to create a distinction and a gap where what holds the gap together between body and soul for Descartes would be God. So Descartes' thinking gave rise to a mechanical philosophy which really paved the way for natural science to rise. And after Descartes, we see all sorts of discoveries in science because it's just inert stuff without sacred meaning, stuff without any mind attached to it. Now, the difficulty for Descartes is that what we lost with this rise of modern science and mechanical philosophy, we lost a place for transcendence. Where does the soul stretch? Where does it yearn? If now this space is conquered and measured. And so I think we begin to see, you might say, sort of a shrinking of the soul. This kind of movement, certainly in religious circles, into interiority. But Ken Wilbur, the American philosopher, says that, in a sense, this self-thinking subject created a crisis of transcendence, insofar as the human person sought symbolic substitutes for transcendence through money, sex, food, fame, knowledge, and power, all of which became substitutes for, he says, true release in wholeness. In other words, that true sense of body, soul, pulling that person into a new wholeness beyond. And, since that time of the 17th century, we have still had this kind of conflict of transcendence. By the 17th century, the world just became a world of measurable stuff and a world of measurable growth. With mind separate from matter, there was, in a sense, an extension of space that gave rise to this world as a vast machine. And so Newton's world emerged, and in a sense, it's our world, right? The world where we can build things. We build buildings, and we build schools, and we build systems that are autonomous, self-functioning, and sort of related to one another by some kind of lawfulness. For all practical purposes, I think we are still quasi-Newtonians. We live as autonomous units governed by some physical laws of motion and gravity. But at the same time, I think that shift from the Middle Ages into the modern era, where the mind became separate from the cosmos and we lost transcendence, we kind of went into a split brain syndrome. We became very left brain, logical, analytical, data-oriented, and we sort of lost the right brain. The right brain, that's the brain that's attached to the body that's attached to the world. And so Teilhard Desjardins, who has been my guide to the 21st century, that wonderful Jesuit scientist, said in one of his writings, "The artificial separation between humans and cosmos is at the root of our contemporary moral confusion." We became detached several centuries ago, and to this day, we do not quite know where we are going. Part of that reason, I think, is that modern science took a dramatic turn in the early 20th century. But science became more and more specialized. You had to belong to the Vienna Circle, so to speak, to know what was going on. But it was Einstein who was, in a sense, unhappy with Newton's concepts of space and time. So if you're unhappy with space and time today, don't feel bad. You're in good company. Einstein did not like Newton's notions of space and time and began to wonder, how can we unify the laws of motion and the laws of electromagnetism? So what did he do? He thought about light. Light. Not the light bulb, but just the light that permeates every aspect of our lives. And what Einstein came to realize is that there is no absolute space and absolute time. In fact, time is sort of a dimension of space itself, and space is something that is unfolding, being created. And we have still yet to get our heads around this. But Einstein basically altered how we even thought about gravity. That gravity is, in a sense, that mass of objects that in a sense, bend space. So contrary to Newton, who thought we lived like in a universe that was more like Legos, where you put it together block by block, Einstein said, no, our universe is more like Gumby or bazooka bubblegum, it can stretch or shrink. And so we live in a universe where we have been able, in a sense, to trace the beginning of space-time back to a point that we call the singularity, since we don't know what the heck that beginning is, right? It's just that point of who knows what. And that's about 13.8 billion years ago. That is a very, very long time. And we can't get our heads around that because we have, I know this is coming as a shock, we have finite minds, right? And we can't even deal with these kind of numbers. But what we do know is that this universe has been gradually unfolding. In other words, space is being created as this universe, in a sense, continues to dynamically expand. And so what scientists tell us is our universe will continue on for about maybe 9 billion years if the sun doesn't burn out, if we don't have other suns to fill in, and maybe 100 trillion years, or maybe indefinitely. Now, for religious thinkers, this is shocking. Since the psalmist says 80 for most, 70 for most, 80 if you're strong, 90 with good drugs, right? So we have yet to really deal with the fact that this universe continues to unfold. But we know it's expanding because we ourselves are part of the expansion at times. What science has also shown us, however, is that what we call matter is really strange stuff. Niels Bohr once said, if you think you understand quantum physics, give it up. Right? It's very strange. And what we now know today from scientific experiments done in the early 20th century is that what we call particles have wave-like properties. And so the stuff we call matter lives in a pluralistic existence. Plurality is intrinsic to materiality. And so the stuff of matter is both wave and particle. And what scientists tell us is that it requires the presence and the active movement of the mind in the measurement of the event to say what something is. Now, these experiments done in the early 20th century were radical. Radical in the sense that science, even to this day, has always been done with the exclusion of mind from the measurement of matter, right? Because we don't want to get any kind of subjectivity involved there. We want true objectivity. But quantum physics says, no, the scientist, the observer, must make a measurement. So mind is part of the measurement. In fact, that's what makes it happen. So what quantum physics tells us is the path, what is real, comes into existence only when we observe it. This was a radical move, and we have yet to deal with the presence of mind in matter. But what quantum physics also told us, and more we're beginning to realize is that the stuff of life is not individual stuff like billiard balls, but rather our prime source of materiality is energy. And in a sense, the fundamental fabric of the world is like fields and fields of interlocking energy. So that on the fundamental levels of the universe, we can say that the nature of the universe is undivided wholeness. To such an extent that the physicist Paul Dirac, when he received the Nobel Prize in 1933, and they had a little dinner for him, like we had this evening, for the Madeleva Lecture. And he gave a little talk. Luckily, I didn't have to give a talk. And he said, our material universe is so interwoven that if you pick a flower on Earth, you will move the farthest star. In other words, there's no such thing as a discrete action. There's no such thing as a privatized action. That everything we do is interacting with everything else in the universe. We add to that, understanding now of the physical universe as of unfolding space and interlocking energy fields. The fact that we are moving, we are in a process of change that comprises life. The word evolution best describes how life unfolds. It's that word that still has people slightly on edge, or as people say, do you believe in evolution? I said, it's not a belief system. It's the best description from the point of science that we can say about how life diversifies. And so what we are saying is that life is not static or fixed, it's dynamic and changing. It is not so much a mechanism, but a process. That means it follows lawfulness and orderliness, but there's also openness, spontaneity. Basically saying nature has fun while it's being nature. But if you look at this encyclopedia of life, this process of evolution on an Earth that's really a relative newcomer in the solar system, about 4.2 billion years old or so. But here we are in the evolution of life where I know we're among, people who like books, all right? So 30 volumes of the evolutionary story. Each volume, 450 pages, and each page, 1,000,000 years. That's a lot of bedtime reading, by the way. Volume 1, the Big Bang. Volume 21, the Earth. Volume 29, the Cambrian period. Now, 2 weeks ago, I was in the Pittsburgh airport, and I saw this Brontosaurus skeleton. I mean, it was huge. Well, that's one of our nearer relatives. Volume 30, the dinosaurs go extinct on page 385. We are volume 30, the last page, the last line, and the last 2 words of the last line, human beings. Now here's the sobering reality. There's no period. There's no period at the end of the sentence. We are in evolution. I know it's hard to get our heads around. I mean, I don't think you'll see a relative here, but evolution is not a background to our story. It is our story, which means we have a past and we will have a future. It means that we are unfinished. We live in an unfinished universe. It is not completely fixed. We are being created as we create, which means life moves towards newness. Newness is perhaps our greatest reality, because as far as we know, time is irreversible, which means life is, in a sense, emerging by a process of creativity, of novelty, and future. So what Teilhard said is that we are not simply in evolution. We humans are here, not at the center of the universe. We are, in a sense, as the arrow of the universe, the arrow of this whole process. So what Teilhard said is, we are evolution, now conscious of itself. We can step apart from this process, and we can understand and reflect on the very process that has made thinking possible. It's pretty amazing. But, you know, it's hard for us to get our heads around evolution, but in California, they get evolution. And they're, you know, in a sense, technology is our fastest evolver today. I grew up in New Jersey where we had the cell phone. You know, the AT&T came out in the 70s with the cell phone. It was this big. And we used to have a phone on the wall. I don't know what you did in South Bend here, but we had a phone that had a cord. And someone said, "You're not going to believe this. They're making phones that you'll be able to walk around with." You know, and I said, "You're kidding. A phone you could walk around with?" By the 80s, you know, someone said, "They're going to make computers that you could hold in your hand." I said, "No, that's impossible. What's a computer?" Here we are today. Someone emailed me yesterday and said computers will be obsolete. Facebook rather, is now into brain messaging. Brain messaging. You will have a thought, and your thought will, in a sense, carry the message electronically. That's not my talk this evening, though. So, what Teilhard began to recognize, evolution is not, sometimes we limit this discussion too much to some type of evolution of, when I say personhood, I mean we're all caught up on the human body, which is great. But what he realized, actually in dialogue with physicists, is that evolution is really the rise of consciousness. And that's where a lot of my remarks will take off from in this talk. Consciousness is the name of the game. Even in 1950, James Jean, an astrophysicist, says mind no longer appears as an accident intruder into the realm of matter. Mind may be the creator and governor of the realm of matter. He said the quantum phenomenon makes it possible to propose that the background of the universe is mind-like. Up till this point, we have kept mind out of matter. We have kept it as a distinct human phenomenon. But even physicists are recognizing today that this doesn't hold. Some are calling it the hard problem of matter. Even Bertrand Russell said this. He says, "We know nothing about the intrinsic quality of physical events, except when they are mental events that we can directly experience." He says, in having conscious experience, we learn something about the intrinsic nature of physical stuff. For conscious experience is itself a form of physical stuff. We cannot see anything about matter without mind, which has led, it's a humble moment, quite honestly, in physics, because it means letting go and making some room now for consciousness in relation to matter. And so what some scientists are suggesting is that consciousness may be part of the cosmos itself, so that in the beginning, is consciousness. And by consciousness here, I mean the flow of information that will eventually lead to what we know as awareness. But what some are saying is that mind then may be an emergent process. Mind may be the field where this activity of informational flow takes place. So things that we have up till now said, this is, we're humans and we have minds and we're conscious. What scientists are beginning to say, the whole universe seems to have mind and consciousness. So that what we can say is what accounts for the human mind seems to be active in the universe. Uh-oh, we may not be as special as we thought. Now, Teilhard was, he was a scientist, he was actually a paleontologist, but he was in dialogue with the physicists of his day. And he was intrigued, actually, by this notion of consciousness in the material world. And what he posited was two types of energy. Now, I take his notion on energy as descriptive. I mean, we're not talking hardcore physics here. So he says, look, there's a type of energy where things keep coming together. I mean, look at evolution. Look at this whole cosmic life. 13.8 billion years, and we're here, right? We with our thinking selves and our complex bodies. So he calls this tangential energy, or an energy of attraction. But he says, there's another energy, and that's the energy of transcendence. So he says, things come together, and as they come together, they go beyond. And he began to identify, therefore, this tangential energy as the energy of love. Love not as an emotion or a sentiment, but love as the deep center-to-center attraction. Now, here's a novel idea. If you fall in love, your mind will change. If you fall in love, consciousness changes. You don't have to be a scientist to figure that out, right? Love and consciousness belong together. As love deepens, consciousness rises. And that's essentially what Teilhard posited, not as the human person, but as the structure of the universe. Now, having said that, I thought, well, I think what Teilhard is really talking about are, in a sense, two universes of space. An outer universe that we all know, the universe we love to talk about in terms of Big Bang and physics and the one we observe, but there's another universe going on, the inner universe, the universe of the mind, the universe of what we used to call the soul. But this universe is in tandem with the outer universe. And so basically, I think what Teilhard is saying is this: there's an inner dimension of matter, and there's an outer dimension of matter. I think we have only tended to the outer dimension, and we sort of relegated the inner dimension to something like spirituality, And it's like, oh, you're in spirituality. Well, we're in physics. Right? So it gets translated as we're in the hardcore stuff and you're in that fluffy stuff world, right? But what we're saying is that if consciousness is the inside of matter and religion or spirituality is a function of consciousness, then that's what Teilhard reasoned. Religion experience is part of the inside story of the universe. And this is like, where's she going with this? Teilhard expanded what we have known in light of modern science, and he says, religion is biologically the necessary counterpart to the release of the Earth's spiritual energy. That is, religion has a biological function. It has a function larger than the human person alone. And we have not tended to that aspect of religion. But this is what Teilhard saw as sort of the problem in the 20th century. He said religion and evolution should neither be confused nor divorced because they are destined to form one single continuous organism. In other words, this universe, it has an energy of transcendence. It's moving towards something. And that towards something is, in a sense, what the religious dimension of the universe is about. And so therefore, religion and evolution, he says, need each other. And he says, this is our problem today. We're looking for a religion of humankind and of the earth which gives meaning to human achievements, a religion that will kindle cosmic and human evolution and a deep sense of commitment to the earth. We need a religion that takes seriously the inner dimension of the universe. But we have not been there. We have, in a sense, stayed with Descartes. We have stayed with mind separate from matter. We have parceled out consciousness from the material world, and we have been in a crisis of transcendence until the mid-20th century, when artificial intelligence emerged. It emerged, computer technology and artificial intelligence emerged after a bloody century of war. And I think what we are beginning to realize is that nature will always, always invent itself in a new way. Nature is malleable. Nature is protean. Nature can change. And nature will always seek to transcend any barriers that prevent it from being nature. And so we have invented artificial intelligence, I think, as a way of a new transcendence. Margaret Wertheim says, modern science has systematically dismantled our Western understandings of sacred space, leaving God, heaven, and the souls of the dead with no particular place to go. She says, the understanding of and mastery over physical space, from astrophysics to genetics, has meant a loss of spiritual place in the physical world. And what has that, in a sense, propelled us to do? Find a new space of transcendence. Technology today is more than just utilitarian devices. You know, they're more than just I can connect faster or reach out and touch someone from AT&T. There's something about the cyberspace that's a new cosmology of space. It allows us to stretch, to lose ourselves, to creatively imagine, imagine ourselves out of our boring earthly lives, our biological lives, and to recreate ourselves in a virtual space. You can even fall in love online. But in a sense, cyberspace is now fulfilling a psychological and religious void in modern life. I don't think it's just, coincidence that as the churches lose members, virtual reality is gaining members. There's something that's being transferred from the biological sphere into the technosphere. But the difficulty of this translation is that it is, in a sense, a new digital dualism. We are, in a sense, not regaining ourselves in a new way. We are more divided than ever. And we know that when we, as I walk across campus here, as I do at Villanova, every 20-year-old, everyone has a phone, right? No one looks at anyone. You don't talk to people, by the way. That's not a cool thing to do. You have to have a device before you. Because the device is like a self-extension, right? It's an exoskeletal self. And so, as one writer says, we are in the process of making one another disappear by living more of our lives apart from other humans in the company of machines. But we love our technologies because they are a new space of transcendence. We can, in a sense, we can dream and become something else in these spaces. So we are, as Sherry Turkle says, alone together. And if we think this is a problem, Ray Kurzweil, the Google developer, posits that in about 30 more years, we will be so wedded with our technologies, we will exit Homo sapiens. We will become, in his view, techno-sapiens. And what someone like Hans Moravec posits is that we will, in a sense, overcome mortality. We will be able to download our brains into new mediums, into new chips, and we have a whole language that goes with this: mind clones, mind files, mind wares. So you have your credit cards, you'll have your mind file. And you will show your mind file. We can put that into new, whatever medium, whatever you want to be. We'll just insert it. You'll be good to go. Now, we think, I'm sure you're going, what? Oh my God, I thought this was supposed to be on spirituality, And here we are with mind files. This is happening. This research is happening as we sit here. So this is not just some science fiction, fancy stuff. This is like, I had a phone on the wall in New Jersey, and now I have a cell phone. This will happen unless we don't want it to happen. And maybe that's where I want to, take the last part of this talk. What we realize today is that technology promises to fulfill what religion promised. Technology is, in a sense, a new type of religion. It fulfills, in fact, it builds on the basic tenets of Christianity: immortality, personal salvation, and happiness. Even as Andrzej Jacqueline says, what else can we say? The lame walk, the blind see, the deaf hear, and the dead are at least virtually alive. Right? Technology seems to fulfill the gospel. Maybe it is. But here's really, on a more serious note, what has taken place. I think what we are saying now from science is that mind is integral to nature. Nature is transcendence because there's something at the heart of nature. If we remove mind from biological nature, nature will find a means to transcend itself. To meet, you might say, its religious needs, its inner dimension. There's something about technology that has, in a sense, escaped our everyday eye. It has co-opted the inner dimension of the universe, and we have allowed that to happen. And in a sense, it may account for why the ecological movement has not gone far in over 40 years. Because our minds are not in bio-nature. Our minds are in techno-nature. Because that is our space of transcendence. And therefore, what's at stake here? I think several things. One, we are becoming more and more cosmically dislocated. Because, in a sense, technology creates wormholes, right? Even as I walk across this beautiful campus, I take in the beauty of the grass, the trees, the buildings. But when I text someone, I, in a sense, move from point A to point B without walking across the campus. Studies show, even among the Inuit Indians, that once the GPS was inserted into the Inuit tribe, they started losing a consciousness or mindfulness of belonging to the earth. I mean, if you have a GPS system, what do? You listen to the computer. You're not attentive. I could be driving in Alaska. All I know is it says make a right, make a left, and stop here. Second thing is we're getting shallower in our thinking. As we export the human self onto technology, we know that the human brain is changing, that our memory capacity is thinning out, and we're also thinning out our frontal cortices. Because in the past, we used to ask a person about a book or a movie. Now we Google everything. Third, I think this kind of space of transcendence has become the space of religious transcendence, where, in a sense, we seek to live out, you might say, our deepest longings and desires. The problem, however, with technology is that it really is an illusion. It is doing no more than extending the modern self, the modern dualistic self, mind separate from matter. Henri Bergson, the French philosopher, was not happy, actually, with Darwinian biology, and he said, our natural capacity for combining biology and technology has not gone far enough. It remains in the grip of closed societies. He says, nature is conservative, and what living beings do most is to cling and resist. And it's true, we don't like change. He says, the evolutionary tendency to change is the creative power of life as radical becoming. So he says, while nature resists change, there is an openness in nature to change. But he says, in order for that change to really take place, something other than nature must, in a sense, be at the heart of nature. And so Bergson points to what he calls sort of a supernatural. He doesn't quite use that language, but he says we must loosen the bonds of nature preserving itself toward nature birthing itself. Well, this became very influential on Teilhard, who said, yes, there is one at the heart of nature that is other than nature. And he called that Omega. Omega, first, as that principle of absolute oneness or absolute love that is completely other, divine, and yet completely within. And so he sees Omega as God. The God present within is the God present ahead. Even, however, the ancient Greeks, I think here Teilhard follows the ancient Greek tradition that there's always been conceived a sense of otherness at the heart of thisness. From all the Greek philosophers down, from Heraclitus to Plato to Plotinus, there's a sense of a unity, a oneness, a fire, something that is, in a sense, dynamizing this life, inspiring it, enkindling it. Plotinus, happy guy that he was, said, this one is not external to anyone, but present within all things, but they are ignorant that he is. Ignorant. Something present within, wholly other within, that we are not mindful of. Thomas Merton spoke of le point vierge, right? That virgin point at the center of our being is a point of nothingness, untouched by sin and illusion, a point of pure truth, a point or spark which belongs entirely to God, which lies inaccessible to the fantasies of our mind or the brutalities of our will. He says, this little point of nothingness in us as our poverty is the pure glory of God in us. An absolute oneness, an absolute center of love, wholly within, wholly beyond. That, in a sense, led me to begin to rethink the soul. Because I think we need to, just as we've given a lot of attention to science, we need attention now to the science of the inner dimension of the universe. I went back and found the Victorine scholar Thomas Gallus in the 13th century spoke of the structure of the soul as having this tip, this point, this apex mentis, this openness to God. And yet, a part of the soul that could know and a part that could be oriented toward the good. What I liked about Gallus is he likened the structure of the soul to the structure of the cosmos in his day. So that, the soul's ordering is the same as the cosmic ordering. Now that got me thinking, what if we were to rethink our soul in light of our cosmos? So that we can think of the soul as the mind, the field of mind, or the ground of consciousness, that place of inner freedom, that place that is self-determining and co-creative, which means that the soul is not some abstract thing that we have. the soul would follow then the same characteristics as our expanding universe. The soul has, you might say, a capacity to expand. The soul has a light. The soul has a gravity of love. The soul is centered in Omega as the universe is centered in Omega, so that what's happening in the outer world is, in a sense, happening in the inner world. Are you with me? This is a long way around to get to something that's got to be fairly straightforward. I know. Well, I had to take up an hour. No, I'm only kidding. So that I imagine it this way. Here's our universe that has two universes, two levels to this universe, an inner universe and an outer universe. And I would prefer to say that it's the inner dimension that moves the outer dimension. It's consciousness that, in a sense, moves space. Now, I'm going to add to this mix the fact that there is one at the heart of this process that Teilhard names Omega, that we name as God, that we claim as Christians that this Omega becomes evolution, enters into materiality. As Teilhard said, you know, the self of God is in the self-emptying of God. This is a God who gets wholly involved. This is a God who is not found in opposition to matter, but through matter. So that, you might say, we take hold of God in the finite. Now, why is that important? It's important, I think, when we get to Jesus. Because here's a process of evolution in which Jesus of Nazareth emerges. But he emerges with a new structure of consciousness. There's something in Jesus that is not like everyone else. He is the faithful Jew, and yet he has this kind of inward liberation. And he says, accept the responsibilities of your freedom. Accept, in a sense, you know, the fact that the reign of God is within you. So what is it about Jesus in this process of evolution? What is it about his inner life that, you might say, moves the outer life? Well, first thing is we can say, Jesus was a cyborg. Now, I know you've known that. But what we are saying is that he tells us what now science tells us about nature. Guess what? Nature can be hybridized. Nature can be altered. One scholar speaks of Jesus as a mutation. In other words, he is so, you might say, in tune with the one, with God at the heart of his life, he comes to a radically new consciousness and therefore a new center of love. He is within biological evolution and different from it. He is, in a sense, something like a strange attractor. And so I think we see in Jesus, here's the key, a new structure of existence. A new structure of existence. And in a sense, this is what the Gospels are about. The reign of God is within you. You will do the works that I do, but you will do even greater works than these. We are in the Easter season, resurrection. What has changed about us? Where are our minds? Pre-Easter, post-Easter. Because I think if you follow this trajectory of story, what we are saying is that mind moves matter. Mind in union with God, Omega, love, brings us to a new level of consciousness. That's, I think, what the resurrection story is about. A new sense of selfhood, a new sense of belonging to the cosmos. And, you know, as much as I like science, I have to eventually say that the mystics teach me a lot more. Because what we begin to realize through the mystics is that our minds create the world, not the other way around. And this is something that science is beginning to understand from a different perspective, and it's a little bit resistant to it. But, you know, truthfully, if you look at, now, I would not call these the great mystics of our tradition, but look at the Buddha and St. Francis. I had to include Francis here somewhere. So there he is, right? what do? They focus their minds. They slow down. They gather their minds, and they train them for centeredness in love. And that's, in a sense, what Wilbur sees. The mystics, he says, are, in a sense, the higher levels of evolution through an expansion of their consciousness. He speaks of this as a movement from the subconsciousness of matter to the self-consciousness of mind to the superconsciousness of soul and spirit. And what we learn from the mystics is, in a sense, consonant with what science is telling us today. When inner reality is stronger than outer reality, one can act from choice, creating one's own life. Isn't that what Jesus was about? Operating from an inner reality by which he can then confront and engage the world in a new way. And that's, I think, what we are being called into today if we tend to the inner universe as source of the outer universe, or what Marina Rainer Rilke called the outer space within. Through every being, single space extends. Outer space within. Through us the birds fly silently. Oh, I who'd grow, I look outside, and in me grows the tree. That seamless space from outer, inner, outer, the flow of mindful love that creates the space of unity. We have work to do because we have allowed ourselves to become brain fatigued. We are couch potatoes. We have information coming at us from every portal, and we don't know how to slow down. But what we do know is that the brain can change. We can train the brain to focus on a higher level of consciousness. We can, in a sense, expand our inner space. And what I am suggesting is that as we expand inner space in union with the one, or God, or love, our outer space changes as well. In other words, our disconnect in the outer world is reflective of our disconnect in the inner world. And so my wondering is, can we move towards a new discontinuity between inner, outer, mind and matter, soul and universe, person to person? One thing I want us to just appreciate is that we're undone, unfinished. In fact, the I is not something that God did in the past and sort of, left us here to fend on our own. Get a degree and get a job and hope you make it. It is God's creative activity, right? The I is God's acting, God's loving in the present moment. The I is the now of God's creative love, which means that the more we can come into the authenticity of self, the more we come to the authenticity of God. So even as the the mystic Mansur al-Hallaj says, I saw my Lord with the eye of my heart, and I said, who are you? And he said, yourself. There is one at the heart of us that is our source, our life, our hope, and our future. And what, in a sense, we are saying here in light of Jesus is that the more we can enter into this oneness, the more we are free, in a sense, liberated from what we think we're supposed to be or our fragmentations. And therefore, we come to a level of what Beatrice Proutot called, you might say, an active living out of spondic energy, living at the point where the next person is also in the act of being created. So that you might say, you're being created and I'm being created, and we meet one another on a threshold of emerging life. And so rather than saying, hey, you need to think like me, can we say, may you be, that we are, in a sense, being created together. And what we are saying is that when the inner universe is consonant with the outer universe, that we are not living in some kind of functional dualism, or a cognitive dissonance. Truthfully, I think we have global schizophrenia. We are functionally, a split brain. But we have the capacity, in a sense, to come to a new level of inner-outer expansion, where we can move to more love, more unity, more consciousness, a type of personhood that takes creativity seriously as the act of making a future together. And that's what Beatrice says. If we really accept creation as ever new, and we see ourselves actively participating in this ever new creating, then we are always facing the future. That is our reality. The future is our reality, and this is, in a sense, what we're about. So Teilhard looked at this whole thing, and he says, we have the capacity to unite. We have the capacity, in a sense, to go forward in a new unity, and we must, he says. This is, in a sense, our survival. Otherwise, we're not going to make it. He did say, either we unify or we annihilate. And therefore, he saw the role of technology not as sort of diverting our minds into another altered transcendent state, but drawing us in a new mind and heart to a new collective mind, what he called the noosphere. But he said, technology must, in a sense, work in the service of love. Are we using technology to deepen what we are as persons? Is it pulling us together, in this inward rise of God? So the term he used was ultra-humanism. Can we use technology to move towards a level of shared thinking and an expansion of community through greater unity? And by ultra-humanism, what he meant was more being, more justice, more peace, more forgiveness, more mercy and compassion. In other words, we are constantly being created and being created toward what? Toward more life together. And he called that planetization. And he saw that technology could, in effect, lead us to a new type of thinking, a co-reflective thinking, that could eventually lead to a co-evolving deepening of heart, a reemergence of feeling for one another and feeling for the earth in a new way. And I love this picture because this is a single face with, you might say, a global mind. The key to it really is rediscovering our inner universe. We've had a spirituality for centuries, but that term has undergone many iterations and many understandings. In our culture, we tend to marginalize, we tend to relegate spirituality to some kind of sphere that's not quite in the center of, what's really important. The hard science is really important. Economics, really important. Spirituality, that's nice. What Teilhard says, no, that niceness, that's what's driving the whole of evolution. We need to shift our priorities and our attentions. And in doing so, to find a new unity and a new freedom, a new kind of spondic energy, a liberating energy, where we can act in relation to the one who is within us and who goes before us. Here's, in a sense, what I see through this kind of complex iteration from the Middle Ages into the 21st century. We have split apart body and soul, mind and spirit from reality. We have allowed our attention to be diverted, caught up, almost mesmerized by our technologies. We find ourselves exhausted. We are weighed down. We are more fragmented today than, in a sense, ever before, at least because we know more today. We're more aware of things because of the internet. But we're not going anywhere. The earth continues to suffer. The poor continue to be poor. And what we don't realize is that we have the capacity to change. That's what nature teaches us. Nature is transcendent. Nature is malleable. Nature is techne. I think this is what Jesus was trying to tell us in his own way. We have the capacity to become new beings. We have the capacity to become a new type of community, that all may be one. If we want a different world, then we must become a different people. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Ilia, for your incredible insights. We have about 15 minutes for questions, after which we'll have a reception in the lobby and announce our 2018 Madeleva Lecture. So there are microphones that will be circulated, and then we will thank Sister Ilia one more time.
Thank you so much. I guess I have a live microphone. I wondered if you could say something more about the things you said about technology, particularly its sort of alienating functions, resonates with the people you're talking to. We get that, and that's really important. But you also refer to technology as something that is opening us to
Absolutely.
the future in some ways.
Sure.
I just wondered if you could you unpack that in some way? I mean, what really is, there's a lot of genuinely liberating things there, and I wondered if, in some way, the opening of technology might be, you know, you talked about Teilhard and religion, and sometimes that was religion, sometimes it's spirituality, sometimes it's God. But I wondered if the technology as a new religion is simply an awkward and baby religion that is still struggling to find its feet in some way.
Right. So, okay, that's good. Good question. I mean, so let's try to unpack those comments. First of all, technology is, in a sense, ambivalent in value. We create the technologies. So the value of technology is, in a sense, the values we give to technology. And therefore, I think it's a question of what do we want with our technologies? Why are we creating them? What do they hope they'll do for us? Second is technology is an extension of biology. It's not something that's antithesis to what we are biologically. It is, in a sense, an outgrowth of the biosphere. In fact, if you look biologically, biology is always techne, right? It will always find means of tool making. What's different is this. We have, in a sense, shifted in our use of technology from something as an aid or tool for development to, in a sense, co-opting us. But when I say that, let me just qualify that. We have given our allegiance to technology. We give our minds and souls to technology. There's something about technology that grasps us beyond the utilitarian level. And by that I mean when we start to spend 24/7 of our waking hours immersed in our technologies, which may be good and maybe not. The good part is we can connect, right? We can connect with people around the world. We can text message. The bad thing is when someone comes to your door and they knock and say, do you have 10 minutes time? We're preoccupied. Our minds are elsewhere. Our bodies are in our rooms. Our minds are elsewhere. We are not really wholly there. That's the kind of dislocation I'm talking about, where we allow our minds to wander into vast fields of cyberspace, where our earthly lives can be boring, and there are studies, all sorts of studies on this. Studies where people have boring lives, they go on to cyberspace in Second Life, and they get an avatar. You can become a palm tree, you can become an elephant in a circus. And if you do that or I do that, I can spend a lot of my free time, in the circus, and people love me, right? In my real life, I can be this crabby person. So it's a disconnect. Is it willful? I don't know. But what it is doing, it disconnects us, and therefore our minds are not on the earth. Our minds are we're not even conscious sometimes that we're running water excessively. We're not conscious of how we are acting in the biosphere. And that's what I'm trying to say here. Consciousness affects space. That's what we're saying. And what the mystics show us is that consciousness can unify space. In a sense, whether across the traditions, the mystics come to a more unified interior space by focusing their minds. And that interior focus shifts the space of their outer world to a new level of unity. Technology does not afford that. And I don't know if I said this here, but the techno movement and the eco movement have been growing. I mean, they emerged around the same time. Technology in 1956 is when the term artificial intelligence was coined. We have 1962 with Rachel Carson, if we take her as the tipping point of the eco movement. 1962 to 2017, not much has changed in the ecological movement. Global warming is getting worse. It's not getting better. We are still unmindful that our daily practices are having environmental consequences that are irreparable. In that same period of time, we have gone from the phone on the wall to the computer in my hand to soon we'll have the implanted chips and robots interspersed with us. So there's something about the gravity of technology. And that's why when I speak of it as a type of religious transcendence, we are giving, in a sense, our allegiance to it because it pulls us beyond ourselves in a way that ecology does not.
Thank you so much for your talk. I've found your analysis really persuasive, and speaking as someone who's not in the heart of the millennial generation, but at the beginning of it, it really resonates with the experience that many of us have of feeling disconnected from the world around us. I went on a run this afternoon on this beautiful campus, and I had to stop and take photographs of things. But that tension there, so I did feel deeply connected to the place. Actually, it was a profoundly spiritual experience of my feet falling where the feet of the saints, so to speak, have fallen. And then also this need to share this and to pray in public, if you will, with others. So I'm wondering if you can maybe flesh out some of what you're saying with some practices. What ought we do in relation to technology? I don't hear you saying, now let's just get rid of all of our devices and check things out. But what kind of practical vision could you offer in light of that?
Right, so I love technology. I should probably just preface with that. I'm not a Luddite by any means, but we do need to be conscious about our use and development of technology. In other words, we have the capacity for choice at every moment of our lives. Everything from, should I answer my cell phone every time, I get a message or I get an email? Can I unplug? Do we have cyber Sabbaths? That would be number one. Do we have one day of the week where we actually unplug all our devices and make a conscious effort, not to tend to those devices, say, and here's a novel idea, go talk to another person, right? Or go on a bike ride, or just sit in nature. It's very simple, right? We attend to what we love. And so love and consciousness go together, right? And it's where we find love that we will place our minds and our hearts. So cyber Sabbaths would be one. I think monitoring how often we have to look at our phones every day. Do we have every time is, you do know that every ding is a dopamine rush, right? Every time it dings, you get a little drop of dopamine. Now dopamine's a little high. Right? So like, woo! So, it's like, oh, like someone emailed me, right? And then you go, oh, God, I don't want to answer that. That's another neurotransmitter. We won't go there. So what we are saying is that these little dings have neurophysiological effects on us. They become as addictive as any drug. I mean, we should just take note of that, right? So there are things we can do. First of all, to be aware that this is not just innocuous, piece of hardware. It's affecting me biologically, physiologically, and as I'm affected, I affect the world around me. How I am, how I choose, and how I relate to others.
Thank you for challenging us all to kind of look at the innerness of our being here with you and in our world. You said much about artificial intelligence, and I'm not sure if you mean just generally speaking what our technology is developing, or if you're looking at, or if you're speaking, maybe you could be more specific about the artificial intelligence that gets reflected in some of the developmental edges of our technology, almost as mirrors of our expanding consciousness. And is there a way in which we are placing a trust, maybe a blind trust, in the development of that artificial intelligence to be our salvific experience?
I think my short answer would be yes. Insofar as, again, we're creating. These devices, this artificial intelligence is emerging out of our capacity, our conscious capacity to think, to reason, and to create, right? So there's something of that, of this intelligence that's of us. So in a sense, it is a mirror. Technology is like a mirror of who we are and what we are. So in a sense, we could ask, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all, right? And so are we placed, well, again, your question is, in a sense, where I was trying to go. We are placing a trust in this technology that in past centuries we would have placed in a higher being, namely God. But, I asked my students this question, is technology a new religion for you? One said, in a sense it is, because it's a lot easier. I can access it quicker. I get quicker answers. I can look up. So religion is, in a sense, where we place our trust, where we place our hope, where we place our allegiance, what pulls us onward, right? To something beyond ourselves, that transcendent nature. So it does, in a sense, technology does, in a sense, fit those criteria, for religious phenomena. One more question. Oh, yes. Yes, right. Right, so your question is good. It's consonant with where I was trying to go. So in other words, what Teilhard would say is we're at the end of biological evolution. We will not evolve anymore. Well, maybe we will. But what he saw is that the next level of evolution would be psychosocial. In other words, it would be consciousness and social evolution, which is what he would call as the level of the noosphere. In a sense, technology has led us there, but we have not been conscious. Several things. We are not conscious of our evolution with technology on a new level of mind, nor are we conscious that that new level of mind requires a new level of soul, you might say, a new level of being. We have sort of allowed ourselves, and here's part of the problem, technology has evolved exponentially, very quickly, in 40, 50 years, almost at a breathless rate. We can hardly keep up with it. If you have a 3G phone, you're way out of date, right? So we need to step back. It's not Technology is not the problem. Let me just put this right out there. It's not the problem. In a sense, we're the problem. Insofar as we use it, we develop it, and then we are, a sense, allowing ourselves to be lured by it in a way that is unhealthy and unhelpful to, you might say, the dynamics of cosmic evolution. What do we do with the biosphere? What does the planet do as we, now, not to draw too much of a line between planet and techne, or bio and techne. Some technologists would see, for example, mind cloning, as if we get better minds, perhaps we'll take better care of the earth. If we can live longer, perhaps we might relate more. So they might see this kind of renewal of the earth through technology. I think that's a stretch, because what I see happening is we are mindless. We are mindless of the earth that is the very source of our lives. So Teilhard would say, yes, evolution to a new level of the mental, the conscious, and the social, but not to the exclusion of the biosphere. The biosphere comes with us. What we evolve into must be for the planet itself. It cannot be only for the perfection of the human person. Because God is one, that one is at the heart of all life. Big bang onward. Okay, I think that's it.
Thank you, Sister Ilia, so much. That was truly incredible. I figure if she can do all of this without notes, I can do my little closing without notes. Please join us in the lobby for refreshments. We also have a few 30 flyers with coupons on it of Sister Ilia's books. And hopefully you'll join us next year in April 2018 for our 33rd Madeleva Lecturer, Mercy Amba Adoye, who is former Deputy General Secretary of the World Council of Churches and a leader in the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians. So thank you very much for coming out tonight.